All right, if you wanted to start returning, we're going to get started in a minute or so. All right, this is Charles Schroeder speaking. Let's go ahead and get started. I have a special announcement. If you happen to be a state employee, and as you rifle through your bag or your coat or your pockets, and you notice you have a phone missing, please go to the back of the room. We have an extra state-issued phone that no one has claimed yet. And it's not mine, I checked. Thank you, everyone, for participating in the breakout discussions. There's so much we learned this afternoon, and we will make sure to share a customized report of findings based on the conversations that took place this morning and afternoon. With that said, I would now like to take a moment to introduce to you our next speaker, Renee Canady. Dr. Renee Branch Canady serves as Chief Executive Officer of MPHI, a unique public trust dedicated to advancing population health through public health innovation and collaboration. In this role, she leads the strategic direction of the organization as they strive to build a world-class infrastructure to support the Institute's diverse and progressive program areas and projects, while establishing and maintaining stakeholder relationships. Without further ado, Dr. Canady.
Thank you, Charles. I always feel like when I'm one of the closing keynotes, that I have to say thank you for staying. Don't ever take the presence of people for granted. So, what a full day. I'm so sorry that I wasn't able to be here for the entirety of the summit, but I've been chatting with those of you who were, and it sounds like your brains are throbbing with new ideas and thoughts. And so I'm going to try to pour a little bit more into those brains and also a little bit into those hearts, because we believe that health equity work is head and heart work. And so I just want to, I was thinking about if I had a lovely slide to project, what would the title be? And I think it would be Achieving Health Equity, the Mandate and the Opportunity. Today, you've heard lots of opportunities, and I would just submit that there's a mandate for good enough is not good enough. We are the ones that are going to push to the next level of change. And so I want to start out with a story, and I just have it pulled up on my phone. And it's called A Durban Morning. The sun is low on the horizon on a lush and brilliant South African morning. The hills in the distance shimmer with 100 shades of green. On a dirt footpath paralleling the dusty road outside of Durban, South Africa, two men approach each other from opposite directions. Their history could be the history of men and women meeting on dusty roads anywhere in the world. Each man brings a tribal heritage or past that includes at least one violent chapter. Today, as they near the point of intersection, each is aware of their past difficulties and their tribes, and there is an instance of discomfort. The moment passes quickly. The anxiety is replaced by something much larger. As the men pause for a moment of greeting, the harsh history of the conflict between their clans and the more recent and equally harsh shared moments of apartheid come to simply background for their wide smiles and their heartfelt salutations. Sawubona, says the first. I see you. Sikona, replies the second. I am here. And with this simple exchange, they bring each other into existence, for it is their belief that a person is a person only through human connection, through the recognition of one another. We have been walking around, beside, behind people for generations without seeing them. Their health is failing, their well-being is failing, their emotions are destroyed, and we're just walking by, not seeing. And so I've been challenging leaders to see differently, to say differently, and to do differently. And I want to give you just a few little thoughts on that. I mean, I can't help but, as I think about that story, marvel at sort of this universality of relationship and honor and equity. This story has all kinds of principles in mind that we too should be in a season of disruption. We're not gonna put up with this anymore. I just heard the tail end of the session in this room right before we came up. When are health systems going to, was the question. We have to throw down some gauntlets. So if I'm here to talk about health and health equity, recognizing that we're a pretty diverse group, multidisciplinary, multi-sectoral, I want to just give some framework for what health is. And I want to do that using a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King. And Dr. King said, "I have the audacity to believe that peoples everywhere can have 3 meals a day for their bodies, education and culture for their minds, and dignity, equality, and freedom for their spirits." I listen to that quote, I just want to go, duh. Yeah, can we just help people be well in their body, be well in their minds, be well in their spirit? That is what health equity is. That is what health is. And that he could say, I have the audacity to think. And here we are, decades later, being prodded to say the same thing. I just have the nerve to believe that we can figure this out. That's what health is. It's bio, it's psycho, it's social. But we're sort of taught to see it very narrowly. I always like to talk about kind of the four basic food groups of health, right? We tell people, exercise and stay fit, and be sure you're eating a healthy diet. And be sure that you go see your doctor regularly. Make sure you know your numbers. And then we got very progressive and we started adding sleep deprivation in there. Get plenty of rest. And that is what we, even in public health, preached on the wellness mantra. But we began to realize that what impacts health, yes, is those things, but the why behind those things. Why don't people do those things? What is the walk home from school for our kids? Is it lush and green and safe? Or is it riddled with broken glass and boarded up housing? That's a health issue. What is the business district like? Is it also boarded up? Boy, man, so many abandoned buildings post-COVID. That's a health issue. What is our indoor air quality like? Some communities, vibrant and healthy and refreshing, and others smelling almost the soot of disease in the air. What's the view from the backyard where kids are playing? Again, is it lush, or is the factory and all the smoke like right across the fence? These are the things that equip us to think about health, housing, schools. You know, there's a school in Texas that I always use as an example, because the school, it's a high school, a middle school actually, is literally built right next door to the jail, to the county jail. And if I could project a picture of those two buildings, you would be hard-pressed to figure out which one is the school and which one is the jail. They called the school the House of Brats. But if all you see every day is men, probably black and brown men, being brought to this building right next door in police cars, what images of yourself, what hope of yourself, what healthy view do you have? And so these are things that are constructed by us. Somebody sat in a meeting somewhere and decided building the school next to the jail was a good idea. Who, how, why? You know, that school didn't just pop up. It was the consequence of decisions. And so I want to offer a little bit of thinking on the opportunity. CEA Winslow, who is a public health founding theorist, says that our mission in public health is assuring the conditions necessary for good health. He didn't say, make sure everybody exercises every day and make sure everybody gets a healthy breakfast or eats well. He talked about the conditions. Our job is to make sure people can exercise every day if they choose to. What is the context of their lives? What's the environment of their lives? And so that's the opportunity that we are laying forth. And I just want to offer some challenges in why, if we know all these things, what is happening? And I came across this quote actually at the Maternal Infant Health Summit that MDHHS did last week, and it was one of the speakers used a quote from Karl Popper, the author of The Open Society and Its Enemies. This is 1945. So here's the quote. He says, "Ignorance is not a simple lack of knowledge, but an active aversion to knowledge. The refusal to know, issuing from cowardice, from pride, or from laziness of mind." He continues and says, "No rational argument will have a rational effect on a man, woman, person who does not want to adopt a rational attitude." That's what we're seeing right now. Like a whole bunch of people going, "You can't see me, you can't see me," or no, blah, 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 blah. People are resisting knowledge, contrary to everything we have been socialized to see. And so, how do we shift the lens? How do we begin to see differently? And in our work in public health, and I was formerly the director of the Ingham County Health Department in Lansing, Michigan. And we began this journey as a part of a national movement to transform public health back to its root causes. Like that, this whole issue of helping those, providing resources to those, that was what we were designed to do as a field. It was about social responsibility, not just personal responsibility. Yes, we have responsibility, but as a society, if we're saying we want to push personal responsibility, then as Winslow said, then we have to assure the conditions necessary for people to be able to be personally responsible. And so we land in this context as we're trying to see differently. And I just want to, I'm not a historian, but I just want to walk you through just one little timeline, right? If you think about what our nation has experienced together, and I offer that I grew up in a military family. My dad was career service. My brother is a West Point grad. And so we do bleed red, white, and blue, which is why I push us to truly be the best that we can be. But if you think about 1619, when the first ships with enslaved Africans came over, then to about 1865, right, where slavery, the Emancipation Proclamation, all of that, that's about 250 years. Then there was this little period that we describe as limited citizenship, where there was still segregation, Brown versus Board of Education, all of that civil rights stuff that was happening. That was about another 100 years. And then the last post-civil rights era what in this timeline was about another 50 plus years. So really, if you add all of that up, 100% of the US Black experience has been a struggle for humanity, a struggle for equality. And I often say, as a medical sociologist, that we learned how to oppress because of our history of enslavement. And then we aligned it to gender oppression. And then we aligned it to class and economic oppression. And then we aligned it, peppered in sexual orientation and gender identity oppression. We just kind of found all these other fields in which to practice it. These are not just historical events. The impact of these events are unresolved, which is why we still are talking about this. So allowing us to kind of fine-tune our lens around what we're seeing and the impact that it has is really, really important. Right now, we're doing a lot of talk in public health around social determinants of health, SDOH, and we talk a lot about job security, social connection, transportation, food, education, living wage, employment, housing, all of those things, but we don't really talk about the why behind that. Why do some people have wonderful, affordable, safe housing and other people don't? Why do some people have outstanding education and others don't? Why do some people have available, healthy food choices and others don't? And so that's really where the solutions are going to be found as we see the problem a little bit differently. So it's not just about housing, it's about housing policy. I remember my son did an internship at the federal level on education, and he called me one day just horrified and indignant, and he said, do you know how they figure out how schools are going to get funded? Like it's like the taxes from the neighborhoods in the area. Yep. Well, it's not the kids' fault that their parents couldn't afford a bigger house. I don't understand why we do it this way. It's like, okay, that type of indignation is where solutions are going to come from. Global deregulation, the social safety net, tax policy, all of those are the whys behind that. And why do we have sort of this complete power and wealth imbalance across those areas, the labor market, education, food systems, distribution, all of that? You know, why are French fries so much cheaper than vegetables, fresh vegetables? Potato subsidies way back. Like there are these things where the residual, I'm like, can the broccoli farmers get a subsidy so we could be healthier? And we just believe that behind all of that, right, the lower level, not upstream issues of social determinants of health impacted by these power and wealth imbalances are then shaped by racism, classism, gender oppression, and other ways. Those are the root causes. And as our theme says, all problems have roots like a tree. But we've been trimming away at the problem instead of digging down to the root. I think we're getting closer to that. So we're seeing differently that way. Saying differently also makes a big difference. What we say, how we say it. Right now, man, all the cool kids say equity, because that's what they told us to say. But I would offer that everybody saying equity does not mean equity. My grandmother, who was this beautiful Southern black woman, used to say to me, baby, everybody grinning ain't tickle. And I just feel like everybody saying equity don't mean equity. And equity is actually the easy thing to say, right? It's like ensuring that everyone has an opportunity to be healthy, to be safe. Yes, mom and apple pie, let's do it. Very fewer of us want to talk about health inequity. That's where I'm trying to push us to stand, to set our heels, to root our strategies in disrupting inequity. And I love Margaret Whitehead's definition. I say it over and over. If you've ever heard me talk, you're going to hear it again. Because she defined health inequity as the differences in population health status and mortality rates that are systemic, they are patterned, they are unfair, they are unjust, and they are actionable, as opposed to being random or caused by the people that get ill. We gotta stop blaming folk and understand the context. I love this definition because I don't care where you live in the United States, when you cross over into that part of town that's not as safe, you know immediately. You start seeing liquor stores popping up, you start seeing all of the fast food. I mean, it's patterned. We do it the same way, no matter where we are in this country. And I love that Margaret Whitehead said, well, let me also just throw values into this, because this whole thing is unfair. And it's even unjust. It's just wrong. And so we've also been socialized and taught our professional self, stay here, no feelings, no emotions. And she said, can we allow emotions to fuel the actions that we take so that we really can pursue justice, seek social justice, and disrupt things that are damaging the health of the people that we say we care about? Many of us in this room chose our professions because we want to help people. I want to help people. That's how you help people. So at MPHI, where I have the honor of serving as CEO, about 2 years ago, we began a very intentional journey to be an anti-oppression organization. We talk about racism explicitly, but not exclusively. We're not afraid of the dialogue, because we believe that dialogue is the methodology for action, not just talking about it, but doing it as facilitated by strategic and purposeful dialogue. And this definition of anti-oppression that we use is from Brigham Consulting in Grand Rapids, love them, and their definition is anti-oppression is advancing equity, power, and voice in humanizing ways across identities, within relationships, within systems, and within structures. We are trying to be our best selves at work so that we can be our best selves at home, in the community, at church, at synagogue, wherever we live, work, play, pray, and even where we will ultimately die. The challenge, the opportunity, is to be our best self there so that we can be our best self in the spaces where we're also being paid. So, seeing differently, saying differently, and lastly, let me just chat for a second about doing differently. If we're pursuing anti-oppression and deep equity, not just equity, what does that look like? I love this work by Dr. Howard Koh, who's a former Assistant Secretary of Health with HHS, is now a professor at Harvard University, and he does research on public health leaders. And he published one study, and he described a couple of characteristics that he found trends and patterns in public health leaders. And I would offer that these also apply to what I would call equity leaders. Howard Koh says that public health leaders are generally driven by a profound and fundamental sense of mission. I'm not just trying to get a paycheck. I would offer to you that your salary will never satisfy your spirit. Why do you do what you do? So he says somewhere in there, we just have this profound sense of mission. And there is something in that purpose that motivates public health leaders, motivates equity leaders, and I hope perhaps will motivate you to leave the comfort of the sideline, and he says, to then wade into controversy. Something about leaders that causes them to leave the comfort of the sideline and wade into controversy. I don't want to be the wallflower at this dance. I'm tiptoeing right on in to figure out how I can be a part of the solution. The story I shared about my son and his indignation, we began using as a term productive outrage. We were sitting in a conference room talking about just a number of things that, I'm so tired of having this conversation and the same thing. And, it was the summer of, what did we call it, of unrest, George Floyd's murder, one more time after one more time after one more time. And we were just like, so over this. And instead of thinking about destructive outrage, we kept thinking, how can we be productive? How can we take this outrage and apply it in a way that allows our heart to drive us not just to change or the head work or the knowledge that Karl Popper's quote talked about, but how does it push us into the midst of the circumstances to sustain change? This is not check the box work. We have to stay vigilant. And if you've never experienced outrage, I would offer that it should arise when we think about things like the death of almost 750 people who were migrants seeking a better life, and the delay in telling their story. How about we feel some outrage about the over 1 million lives lost to COVID in the United States? I have friends, as a matter of fact, our lieutenant governor talks about the over 25 people in his family, his friends, who died as a result of COVID. Why aren't we outraged by that? Why aren't we outraged by the fact that Michigan has the highest rate of gun homicides among Black people of any state in the nation? Why aren't we outraged when we learn of an elite Olympic runner, Tori Bowie, who at the age of 32 just recently lost her life due to complications of childbirth? Outrage. We should feel something rise up that says, I got to do something. I may not know right now what I'm going to do, but I am going to do something. On Sunday, my pastor was preaching, and he was trying to say reservation, and he sort of said hesitation, and he ended up saying reservation. And I was like, I feel like that's a thing. I feel like that is what keeps us on the sidelines. This hesitation or doubt or uncertainty or reservation, meaning I'm just going to hold back just a little bit. When we allow doubt or the unknown to cause us to withhold our talents, our abilities, our humanity from caring for other people. And so we're going to ditch reservation to the side. And the way you ditch it, I'm going to give you 4 things, and then I'm going to sit down. Risk-taking. We have to take risk, but nobody wants to. And I even had to build my risk-taking muscles, and I did that by just reading for a long time about risk-taking. And I came across some work. How many of you guys know Brene Brown? Yeah, isn't she amazing? This is not her work, but I just wanted to give her a shout-out. This is the work of Margie Worrell, who is kind of a Brene Brown light. She's on her way. She's on her way. But she says there's 4 reasons why we don't take risks. The first one is that we overestimate the probability of something going wrong. Like imagine yourself on that bungee cord getting ready to jump, and you're just like, I'm going to be the one where the cord breaks. No, the probability of the cord breaking is so low. No, but it's not 0, and it'll probably be me. So we won't take that risk. So she says we overestimate the probability that something will go wrong. The second thing she says is that we exaggerate the consequences of what might happen if it does go wrong. It might go wrong. Like I sometimes use the image, I found this picture of an elephant walking on a tightrope. Well, the elephant might fall off the tightrope, but he also might be over a very, very deep, deep lake, or he might also be over a ton of trees and foliage. And so the consequences might not be as bad as what you have in your mind. The third thing she says we do is that we underestimate our ability to handle it. If it goes wrong, it might go wrong. The elephant might fall off. The bungee cord might pop. But there also might be a way for you to maneuver a successful landing. You can handle it. And the fourth thing that she says contributes to our hesitance and our lack of risk-taking is that we discount or we deny the cost of inaction. We get real comfortable. Well, me and mine, we all good, and, my kids, and I don't know about them. Yeah, Inaction. We don't think about how bad things continue to get. If my neighbor's house is on fire, I'm in trouble. Even though it's not my house that's on fire, I'm in trouble. And I need to do what I can do to help that neighbor. So let me close going back to the quote that I opened from Martin Luther King. The opportunity, and I would offer the mandate now. Martin Luther King again said, I have the audacity to believe that peoples everywhere can have 3 meals a day for their bodies, education, culture for their minds, dignity, equality for their freedom. But the quote continues, and I believe that what self-centered men, I'll say people, have torn down, that people, other-centered, can build up. And I have the audacity to believe that you are those other-centered people. Thank you for joining me on a journey for health.
This is Charles speaking. Can we give it up one more time for Dr. Canady? Thank you for your insightful remarks. I'm going to try to have no reservations in making my next announcement. Now we have another guest speaker, and I'm pleased to introduce Roshanak Mehdipanah. She is an associate professor in the Department of Health Behavior and Health Education in the School of Public Health. She is also director of the Housing Solutions for a Health Equity Initiative, which informs local, state, and national policy through interdisciplinary research on housing as it relates to equity in health, race, socioeconomic status, and aging. She completed her PhD at the University of Pompeu Fabra, Spain, and her MS from the School of Public Health and Health Systems at the University of Waterloo, Canada. Her research focuses on how urban policies, particularly related to the built environment, impact health and health inequities of individuals, neighborhoods, and cities. Dr. Mehdipanah has brought particular attention to housing policies and real estate markets and how they shape health inequities among individuals and across neighborhoods. Through community-based participatory research that is supported through grants from the NIH, CDC, and the WHO, she has developed an understanding of how housing is a determinant of health and has established how housing instability exacerbates health risks. Dr. Mehdipanah.
All right, so good afternoon, everyone. I want to start by saying thank you to Director Johnson and the rest of the Michigan Department of Civil Rights for inviting me here today. I also want to say that behind all the research that I get to do, there's a huge team of folks that bring this work to life, including students and research staff. I especially want to thank the community organizations that I get to learn from and work with daily. And in particular, there's two of those people here today that I want to especially thank, including Steve Tomkowiak and Angela Bertolini from the Fair Housing Center at Detroit Metropolitan. Thank you. Who have taught me a lot about what I'll be sharing with you today. So over the course of today, you've heard from leaders in the field of various determinants of health, including education, environmental justice, sexuality, and disability. These factors shape the way we learn, work, and live. For the next 20 minutes, I want to talk about housing as a determinant of health. And I warn you, you will hear me say that a bunch of times. So housing is a determinant of health, period. I say that because even into 2023, there appears to still be a disconnect between housing issues and their impacts on health. Yet, historically, housing policies and practices have shaped cities and racial health inequities we witness today. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. So housing is a multidimensional determinant of health, often studied under the umbrellas including affordability, access beyond monetary means, and conditions. Much of the public health research has considered affordability and access and has examined the acute impact on mental health, including symptoms of depression and anxiety and the long-term effects on stress manifested through outcomes like blood pressure. In addition to mental health outcomes, we know that there's implications of poor housing conditions, including asthma, allergies, toxics like lead and asbestos, and pest-related diseases that have been discussed. In some studies, the increase of infectious diseases like tuberculosis and COVID-19 have been studied in relation to overcrowded conditions within a home. Unaffordable, inaccessible, and poor quality homes have impacts not only at the individual level, but also at the neighborhood and city levels. So for example, mortgage foreclosures have been associated with worse mental health and physical symptoms like trouble sleeping, chest pain, and stomach cramps. At the neighborhood level, existing research has demonstrated that those who reside in a neighborhood that has experienced high foreclosure rates were more likely to seek treatments in hospitals and emergency rooms for various conditions, including stroke and heart attacks. At the city level, foreclosed homes that remain vacant translate to lost revenue and reduced resources for neighborhood improvements. Housing is unaffordable for many Americans. Nearly 1/3 of Americans spend 30% or more of their household incomes on housing costs, including rent, mortgage payments, property taxes, and utilities. Households that pay more than this are considered to be cost burden and at greater risk for the inability to afford other necessities like food, medical care, clothing, and transportation. Among all renters in this country, half spend more than 30% of their income on housing costs, and a quarter spend 50% or more. With housing prices steadily rising, wages remaining relatively unchanged, overall living costs increasing due to inflation, and a housing supply that has not met the demand, the number of Americans considered to be cost burden is projected to increase. And I just want to say that a lot of people don't realize that paying more than 30% of your income is a considerable amount. In fact, I was doing interviews with students a while back, and somebody said, "Oh, I spend about 90% of my income on rent," but I think that's just normal. However, I still hesitate to say that we are currently in a housing affordability crisis, because the word crisis reflects a very acute period of time where difficulty is experienced. The housing affordability problem has been a long time coming. In fact, researchers like David Madden and Peter Marcuse have argued that it was when social and economic processes that position housing as a commodity symbolizing social and economic success rather than a basic human right to shelter, that's when we began having an affordable housing issue. I want to add that by saying that that is also when the racial wealth gap took off in this country. To prove this, let's go back almost 100 years to when President Roosevelt enacted the New Deal, which were a series of programs, public work projects, and financial reforms. As many of you are familiar, amongst those programs was the Federal Housing Administration, or the FHA, of 1934, which was intended to make home ownership more accessible to middle-class Americans by providing low-interest, long-term mortgages. However, the FHA also instituted the practice of redlining, in which neighborhoods consisting largely of people of color were categorized as being financial risk and excluded from obtaining mortgages. By restricting access to affordable home ownership in these communities, including literally building walls, such policies constrained housing choices among people of color and contributed to the long-term disinvestment in urban communities. The Homeowners Loan Corporation, or the HOLC, created maps to classify the neighborhoods by perceived level of lending risk. So many of you may have seen these, where a city would be divided up into 4 colors, with green being best areas to live, blue being still desirable, yellow being definitely declining, and red for hazardous. Areas with a larger proportion of non-white racialized groups, primarily Hispanics and Blacks, were classified as hazardous for investment. Now, redlining institutionalized neighborhood racial segregation. I say this because segregation was already in place through previous programs that had made it much easier for the HOLC to draw these maps. However, redlining also restricted access to home ownership for Black and brown folks, who then had to turn to land contracts with no safety nets, where buyers could lose any equity built on their home if a payment was missed, even by 1 day. Redlining maps present this unique opportunity to examine the long-term impact of racial structural policies with geographic precision contributing to the racial health equity gap we see in the United States. For example, research has connected historical redlining with various health issues, including preterm birth and mental health issues. However, these studies have rarely discussed the mechanisms or some of the whys of this investment, and that have driven these health outcomes. So in 2021, we set out to examine how historical redlining is associated with differential health opportunities reflected in economic, social, governance, and physical environmental determinants of health in the Detroit metro area. We focus on the DMA, which has a population of approximately 3.8 million. And for those who are not familiar with the area, the DMA is made up of 3 counties, Oakland, Macomb, and Wayne, where Detroit City is located. The DMA was among the nation's largest and most prosperous metropolises at the start of the 20th century. As described by author Thomas Segura, redlining practices of the 1930s set the stage for the establishment of suburbs in the 1960s to the 1970s that lured white homeowners to move from the city to heavily subsidized suburban areas with much lower property taxes. Deindustrialization and globalization then contributed to the loss of many manufacturing jobs, while remaining employment opportunities moved to the suburbs. Together, these processes moved economic sources away from the city and into largely white and wealthy neighborhoods. By 2010, Detroit had lost close to 2/3 of its population and much of its resources. Now, these historical processes have contributed to the racial divide that we see today, where in 2020, Macomb and Oakland counties had approximately 12 to 14% Black residents, while Wayne County had 40% Black residents, with 77% of them mostly living in Detroit City. So what we wanted to do is examine the association between these historically neighborhood HOLC grades and various determinants of health, including education, employment, home ownership, access to health insurance, and exposure to air pollution. We also group all of these determinants into an index, which we called the Determinants of Health Index. Pretty creative, right? I won't go into details about the methodology, as you can find that in the paper that we recently published, but once we overlaid the historical data with the contemporary determinants of health, we began to see a pattern forming. Neighborhoods that had been designated historically green for best fared better across most contemporary indicators. We saw a $60,000 difference in present-day median household income between neighborhoods that were historically green-lined compared to those that were historically red-lined. We also saw an almost 30% difference in home ownership between these neighborhoods. When we compare the maps of the index to the HOLC maps, we also saw considerable overlap, with the green-lined areas tending to have much better contemporary index scores. And to test this further, we found that formerly green-lined areas had on average a 9.25 advantage over red-lined areas. So much more opportunities in those areas. Therefore, our findings highlight the continued effects of discrimination in local policies that govern funding and resource allocation. While a few neighborhoods benefit from investment resulting in greater opportunities for resident health and well-being, where we sometimes call this resource hoarding, historically red-line neighborhoods continue to have fewer opportunities for health and well-being. And while there has been some attention on addressing these neighborhood lower resources and such, we haven't really talked about where are all our resources really going to and why. Stronger responses and protections are definitely needed for residents whose economic well-being and health are at risk due to systematic patterns of disinvestment in predominantly Black Detroit area neighborhoods. And I can duplicate this study and tell you that you'll see a similar study across major cities in the state, including Lansing, Grand Rapids, and Flint. And I realize that some of this is nothing new, particularly for those of you who work in the field of housing discrimination. However, studies like this are critical to changing the narrative from where you live matters to it's not just where you live, it's also why. While there's no doubt that historical redlining has impacted the racial landscape and the wealth gap we see today, housing discrimination continues to be experienced today. And although the Fair Housing Act of 1968, as amended, has made it illegal to discriminate based on race, color, religion, sex, national origin, disabilities, and family status at the time of buying, renting, selling, or financing a home, I have to say this for all the lawyers, we still see cases today. We recently began to study discrimination in mortgage lending in Michigan using the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act from 2015 to 2019. Here, we're particularly interested in examining the associations between mortgage denial rates in Lansing, Grand Rapids, and Detroit metro areas. Our preliminary studies are showing that mortgage lending discrimination has persisted despite policies promoting fair lending. The odds of mortgage denial were nearly twice as high for Black applicants compared to white applicants across the study sample. Our next steps is to closer examine the health opportunities lost due to these experiences of discrimination. Okay, so being the last speaker of the day, I know that I'm working with an audience that probably wants to get out of here and beat traffic, so I'll begin to wrap up. Housing is the foundation for healthy life, but addressing housing disparities is becoming more challenging with a housing market that continues to ignore housing as a basic human right. The public health research makes the case for more affordable, accessible, and adequate housing to promote better physical and mental health. However, immediate action is needed to address and prevent the growing health equity gaps associated with housing. To address these issues and others, a clear understanding of housing as public health issue, including the specific pathways through which housing systems affect access to safe and affordable housing while simultaneously influencing access to other social, economic, and political resources is much necessary to maintain health. But we must also embrace it across disciplines and incorporate it into public and private decision-making. Moreover, an understanding of health equity in housing is necessary to ensure that all individuals, regardless of their race, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic position, and disability status, can access affordable and adequate housing. Therefore, strategies to retain affordable housing stock for low and middle income households must be prioritized. So we must continue to prioritize and address housing disparities in our society to reduce displacements and promote healthier and more vibrant cities. If it's one thing that I want you to take away from all of this, is that housing is a determinant of health. And with increased housing disparities, action must be taken to ensure that no individual is displaced, communities remain whole, and cities continue to thrive. Thank you.
Okay, about to wrap this baby up. Appreciate you hanging with us. Thank you, doctors, for your closing remarks. We really appreciate that. You learned so much, and it really is sort of like a wrap-up of everything we've discussed today. You brought it all together for us and certainly gave us some information that we will use out in our workplace, and we appreciate you coming up. And I will see you again, I think. The last speaker, as I've mentioned, is a teaser to what we intend to do sometime later on in this year in terms of housing discrimination. So we hope to see both of you again at our next conference. Just give them another hand. So again, we thank you for spending the last 7 hours with us. We appreciate you. We especially appreciate the contingent from Novi High School, our future civil rights leaders. Let's give them a hand. We really thank you for coming out today and learning what you have and taking all what you learned back to your high school. Certainly, they recognize some of the inequities that exist within their environment. I know they intend to use this information to address that going back to Novi High School. Our topic, the impact of discrimination on health, was selected specifically to highlight the reality that bias is harmful and unhealthy. The barriers are real and have a measurable impact on our health. So we thank all of our panelists and our speakers because we realize at the end of all of this, it's all about the policies. It's about the public policies, it's about the private sector policies, it's about changing those policies and changing hearts and minds. The strategies that were recommended have been recorded and we synthesized and sent out to you via email, so you'll be able to learn what was discussed in every session, the strategies that are recommended, and believe you, we will synthesize those ourselves and use those as a department to press forward in attacking and changing some of those policies that were talked about today. We are ending the summit, but we are continuing the fight. We are ending the summit, but we continue the fight. We hope that you have received information and the connections that you've made here will serve you well when you return to your workplace. A few final notes. You also will receive a survey monkey to evaluate this conference. We certainly want to receive your comments so we can do this better next time. We will be back again a year from now for another conference, but again, something in between that on housing. Also want you to be aware of our Hate Crime Bias Conference, which will be held September 14th in East Lansing. You want to stay tuned to social media to get more information on that and make sure that you register for that conference. Also, want to remind you that, in case you may not know, this is the 60th year for the establishment of the Michigan Civil Rights Commission. The Constitution that established the commission was voted on by the public back in 1963. So we're celebrating our 60th year this year. You'll hear more about that in terms of a celebration as we again lift up our commission and recognize that Michigan, one of the first states in the country to recognize civil rights and continues, and based on our new administration, certainly is one that will continue to fight for civil rights and enforce those in a manner that you certainly will appreciate. Finally, we want to emphasize to you once again that MDCR is your statewide partner in the fight against discrimination and for diversity, equity, and inclusion. We look forward to working with you in the future on all of these issues. We're very excited. We've hired our first fund development coordinator, which means that we intend to go after some money, not only for the MDCR, but for you also. This is bigger than MDCR. This is about civil rights. So I do want our new fund development coordinator, Liliana Stoneback, if she's in the room, to stand up. Is she in here? She may not have. Anyway, but we did hire her. You'll be hearing more about her. She'll be working with all your agencies. What we want to do is not only develop funding for MDCR, but again, in a collaborative manner, work with all of you to look for funding that may be available for disability work, for DEI work, and for community engagement work. So look forward to that as we see ourselves as the hub of civil rights here in Michigan, the organization that can tie all this together for you. We are your voice in Lansing. We have active legislative policy division. We are on top of everything that's been introduced. We communicate that to you through our monthly newsletters. If you don't receive that, please make sure that you leave us your email address. We can add you to our newsletter list. But we regularly send out information about what's going on in Lansing in regards to civil rights, because we are your connection for civil rights in Lansing. Don't forget that. Before you leave, hope you'll stay with us and partake in a reception that we've planned for you afterwards, right outside those curtains, some adult beverages, well, one, that we'll have for you, and also some snacks to fuel you on your way home. Again, thank you for your participation. Look forward to seeing you at our next conference, and let's continue the fight. Have a good day. Have a good day.